Hey, welcome back, and in this video we're gonna open up Neo4j once again, and we're gonna use it this time to do a little bit of digital forensics, which is one of the sort of key use cases that you can use graph databases or Neo4j in general for use. So we're gonna do something topical in the area of digital forensics with Neo4j, and what we're gonna do is look at the Bitcoin Whitepaper by Satoshi Nakamoto. In fact, we're gonna look at that white paper and one of the original drafts of that paper as well. Now, not only are we going to look at that, we will look at the latest version of that paper by Craig Wright, who has claimed copyright on that paper and claims to be Satoshi Nakamoto. And we will look to see if that document that was published by Craig comes from the original Bitcoin white paper document. And for that answer, you're going to have to wait till a little bit later. Now, first things first, before we open up Neo4j and before we go and look at the Bitcoin white paper, one of the techniques I want to establish is this idea of fingerprinting, right? So I did a video on this before about browser fingerprinting, which is the idea that whenever you create something digitally, you're leaving a bit of a fingerprint behind. So in that video, I discuss browser fingerprinting, which is a technique that advertisers can use to track you on the internet by looking at the digital footprint that you leave behind. And that could be from things like IP addresses, it could be from things like your browser version, what fonts you have installed in your browser, what your browser version is, the headers associated with that. And all of that information is used to try and identify you versus somebody else. And again, other things is location, etc. So if you're interested in that, go check out that video. It's super interesting. But we're going to use some of the same techniques that we use for browser fingerprinting, but this time we're going to use it for this idea of document digital footprints or document signatures. So the first thing I want to say before we look at the Bitcoin white paper is let's have a look at the sort of things that could be left behind on a document. Okay, so first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a word processor on my machine. Now, I don't have Microsoft Word on my machine, so I'm on a Mac obviously, so what I am going to do is open up basically a blank page using Pages, which is Apple's sort of equivalent of Microsoft Word. So if we just create a document, we'll say, hello, my name is Chris. Now, on the font there, you can see that's Helvetica and Noise, but I've got lots of different other fonts on my machine. As you probably notice, my sort of Chris Hey UK brand that I sort of do, everything I do tends to be on Hack. So if I just type in hello world, and that's actually quite interesting. So one of the things I want you to see there is that the word processor is actually automatically spell checking and correcting my words. So again, even for other words, let's say I do the word organization, that's okay. If I do organization like this, that's also okay. Why are those two spellings fine? Because I'm on a sort of British machine, and I've got a sort of ENGB language encoding, so it sort of copes with that. But if I typed in organization, I'm going to get an error, and then it's going to autocorrect it, and see that it's autocorrected that to the S version of organization because I'm on a British machine. If I had an US language template associated with that, then it would move that back to the Z version of organization. And that information is important, and you're going to kind of realize that later. In something like Microsoft Word, which I don't have on this machine, if I typed in organization with a Z, then it would actually automatically bring that back to an S, or at least it would in earlier versions. I don't know what it does today, but I know it certainly used to do that. So we'll just save that for just now, and we'll just call this document Chris. And that's saved as a page file. So if we look at the download folder, you can see Chris, and you see the kind is of type Pages. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to export that to a PDF, and by the way, the original Bitcoin white paper is a PDF, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that I can set on there. I'm just going to hit next on this, and then we'll call that Chris, and it's going to go and generate me this PDF document here. So if I then open up the PDF document, you can see, hello, my name is Chris, hello world, blah, blah, blah. So to recap for a second, what do I now have? I have a document that I created in Pages called Chris, where I've got some text in there, I've set a custom font, etc. And then I've also got the exported file, which is the PDF. So now that we have the PDF of that document, let's have a look at some of the digital footprint that is left behind with a PDF document. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Get Info here. And if we have a look at that, you can see it's a PDF document, you see its size, but some of the metadata is really interesting. You can see it's got a kind of last open date. There is a version, and in this case it's 1.3. You can see it's a one-page document, and you can see the resolution of the document. So in this case, it's 595 by 841. You can see that the content creator, so the software that I used to create that document, was Pages, i.e. the word processor that we just used. And then you can kind of see there that the encoding software was Mac OS version 11.5.2. It was build 20G95 Quartz PDF context. So if I sent that PDF document out to the world, there starts to become a lot of information that becomes relevant about who I am, right? You can tell that the creator of that document was using a resolution of 595.841, that they were using Pages, they were on Mac version 11.5.2, so you start to understand the my encoding software, you understand the build it was running on, you will understand the original software that I used to create it. So that's a lot of information to start working out who I am. And then there's more information as well. So let me just bring up Visual Studio Code for a second. And what we're going to do is open up that PDF document so we can look at some of the underlying binary. So we'll open that up in my text editor. Few things. There's the PDF version. So it's using PDF version 1.3. There's lots of information in here, but if I scroll down to the bottom, and by the way, there's some information about the fonts that I was using. So one of the things I could do if I want to build up a document footprint is to have a look at all the fonts that were used. And if there's an unusual font, then that might start to give clues about the person. Let's go a little bit further. So you can even see here that you got the title of the document, which is Chris. Remember that was the name I gave it. Here's that information that was displayed in the Get Info, which was the macOS version, the build. You can then see the creation date. Now this is really interesting. So in the creation date, you can see it was on 2021. You can see it's December. You can see it's December the 12th. And you can see I did this 1442. So I created this document at 20 to 3 in the afternoon. And then probably the important part that you see here is Z0000. So actually what that's telling you is that I created that in UTC time. So good news is, guess what? Well, everybody knows where I am. I'm sitting in a GMT time zone. And that makes sense because I'm in the UK. It's December, daylight savings hasn't been applied or anything like that. And then you can see there's a kind of modification date, which is the same time today. So that is useful information about the document. So if we were to then, let's switch across to the iPad for a second, you can start to get an idea before we open up Neo4j and before we look at the Bitcoin paper, you can start to get an understanding is that we could start to build a graph database of documents. So now that we understand the sort of digital footprint of a PDF document, we could actually start to imagine what a Neo4j model for that could look like. So I'll draw it on the iPad before we get onto Neo4j itself. So in this case, you can imagine that I would have maybe a node that represents a white paper. So we'll say maybe there's a white paper node, and I could have other nodes for things like emails or whatever. And then I could set things like types of, like PDF, etc. So the sort of things that could be interesting is things like the content creator. So I could have this idea of a content creator node, and then I would have pages set in my case. Now, if somebody else had a different content creator, maybe they were using Word or they were using Acrobat or something like that, then there would be different nodes representing that, and then we could just associate those nodes together with relationships. So, but in this case, it was pages, and then any other white paper that was created with pages would obviously be linked to that as well. So I could have, this could be Chris, and then this could be Chris 2, and then that could link to pages there as well. And the relationship in this case would be content creator, and we could do the same there. So we start to create this link, and then similarly we had the encoding software, so we could have another node that represents encoding software. In this case, it would be the PDF context, and of course I could have further nodes if I want to capture different versions, etc. And then this would be the encoding software. And then what that allows me to do is, as you can imagine, as I start adding new white papers, I can then start to see what encoding software they're associated with, what content creators. And if I wanted to get even further, I could then start to track other informations like title. I could track the creation dates. I could remember time zone. I could track time zone. So in this case, this was created in the UTC time zone, GMT, where I reside. So that could be time zone for creation. I could track versions, and then that starts to build up that metadata, and then I just keep adding more and more documents. So that is the process of footprinting. So what we're going to do now is open up that Bitcoin white paper, or a couple of the Bitcoin white papers, and have a look at the metadata associated with that. And then what we're going to do is represent that in Neo4j. Alrighty, so let's have a look at the original Bitcoin white paper. In fact, when I say the original Bitcoin white paper, what I'm saying in this sense is I'm looking at the version that was published on the 24th of March 2009. So there was multiple versions created. There was lots of early drafts. There was a version on the 31st of October. I don't have a copy of that version, but I do have one, I think, from the 3rd of October, and we'll look at that there. But you can have a look at that, right? So if we look at this, here's the title: Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash. The author is Satoshi Nakamoto. There's the email address. It's bitcoin.org is there, and then there's an abstract, and then there's an introduction. And if you haven't read that paper, it's an absolutely amazing paper. Go read it. This is part of our computer science history, and I'm a big computer science history fan. So go read that paper. It's really kind of worth it. And that's one of the reasons it attracted me to looking at this, because I'm such a sort of computer science history buff. It's really important for me to understand the evolutions of these documents. So it's really great to have a copy of this. But if we look at this, as I said before, it's a PDF. And as I said, with a PDF, we can have a look at the digital signature that it creates. Okay, so now that we've looked at the paper, let's do what we did with the Chris PDF that I created earlier. And let's have a look at the info. So the first thing I want you to notice is the PDF version is 1.4, so that's giving away a little bit of information. There's 9 pages, and you can see the resolution is 612 by 792. Now, if you don't know what that means, it means that it's created in US letters, so that's a standard format. So there we go. Security is none, so that's fine. The content creator is writer, and the encoding software is OpenOffice.org 2.4. So what does that mean? That means that, like the Chris PDF document, the PDF wasn't created originally in something like Adobe Acrobat or something. It means that it was composed in a tool called OpenOffice, and it was version 2.4, OpenOffice Writer, in fact. So that is the tool that was used to create the Bitcoin white paper document. So that's the first thing to realize, is it wasn't done in Adobe Acrobat, it was done in this tool called OpenOffice 2.4. So that's really important information, right? So it allows you, as you start to then, if you can imagine, start analyzing other PDF documents, you can start to build up this picture of who's using what document. Yeah, so that's really important. So this starts to form that digital footprint. Okay, so now that we understand some of that data, What we're going to do now is open that up in Visual Studio Code and have a look at the binary, just like I said before. So let's open that up. Again, we'll look at the sort of binary underneath that. And you can see a few things. So there's PDF 1.4. Okay, that's cool. So we know the version's 1.4. We saw that in the get info. Let's move down to the bottom there. There's some interesting stuff here. There's like a document ID, so we could capture that. That's useful information. There is a checksum of the document, so you see that's F7. So again, that can be used to verify authenticity of the document. And then if we scroll up a bit, there's some interesting stuff in here. So there is a creator there, and what it means by creator, it doesn't mean the person who actually sort of created that document, etc. That is about the tool that was used to create it. So in this case, this is identifying this as, along with the producers, OpenOffice 2.4 and Writer being the creator. So if you think about that for a second, this is the information the get info is using to display that there. So we know it's created by OpenOffice, etc. And then if we look at the creation date, and this is really interesting, so you can tell that this document was created in 2009. It was created in March, and it was on the 24th of March. And then you can see it was created at a sort of 11:33. Key thing I want you to notice here is the -06, which means that it was 6 hours of a difference from GMT, from UTC. So if we think about that for a second, that on that machine, the time zone of that machine was set to mountain time in the US. Now, that's not to say it was in the US. It's not to say it wasn't in something like Canada. It could have been Mexico or whatever. But the thing to sort of say, and it's not to say they were even there. It could mean that it just happens to be that was the time zone that was set on the machine that created this. But we know that on that machine, the time zone was mountain time. So there we go. That's some really important information. And then probably the other thing that's worth looking here is you kind of see this lang. So you see ENGB. So actually, like kind of my machine is, you can see that the language settings were set to ENGB. So therefore, when you I've got things like spell checkers and all that set up, then it's going to use English settings. So that machine, that OpenOffice Writer 2.4 was set to ENGB when the document was created. Again, it doesn't mean the person was English, it doesn't mean the person was American or whatever, it just means that's the style that they were set to. And for example, there's a good example of this in the Bitcoin white paper. So if I typed in something like favor, you can see that it's spelled F-A-V-O-U-R, which is the UK spelling, and an American spell checker is probably going to switch that to favor, which is F-A-V-O-R, I think. So therefore, again, the spell checker is going to help move this to being the English spellings of words, or the GB version spellings of words. So there's lots of information. It's not information about people. Let's be clear about that for a second. It's information about who was the creator, what was the document, what was the machine. It's a digital footprint of the machine that created that document. And that becomes important for when you're trying to determine if it came from the original source. So let's take a breather for a second, and what we're going to do is we're going to open up Neo4j and we're going to start to capture some of that data, and then take the drawing that I did in the graph database and then start to try and represent how that would look in Neo4j. So first thing I'm going to do is open up my terminal, and we're going to get Neo4j started. Now I have a whole video on getting started with Neo4j. If you don't know Neo4j at all, I recommend you go check out that video. But actually at the moment you don't need a lot of knowledge to do that. You know, I'll walk you through this as we go along. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to run Neo4j. I always run Neo4j as a Docker container, just for ease of use on my sake. So if you've got Docker installed on your machine, great. Because I'm running a Apple Silicon, Apple M1 chip, I have to use kind of -- platform Linux /AMD 64, otherwise I get an error. Again, it's all described in the other video. There's a little bit of port mapping just so that I can access Neo4j's browser on my machine. So you can see it's running on port 7474. And then the password is going to be set to Neo4j as a username and test as the password. And I'm using the latest Neo4j image. So if I just run that, it's going to take a few seconds to get that up and running on my machine. Alrighty, so now that Neo4j is started up on my machine, let's open up the browser and see what that looks like. So alrighty, so now that Neo4j is started, let's just open that up in the browser. So as you see, Neo4j has started. I'm connected in as user Neo4j, username Neo4j, password is test. So when it prompts you, you know to type that in. So if I just type in match n and then return n, what you're going to see is that we have nothing in our graph database just now. So we have an empty graph database. So match n just means find me every single node, and return n means find me, return those nodes that match that query. So in this case, it's just going to return everything. The first thing we need to do, and I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code for a second, is we need to create a structure to start to represent those white papers that we are going to pull into our graph. So actually, rather than you sit and watch me type everything, I've created a couple of bits already. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through this slightly, but hopefully it will make sense to you. So you see, the first thing is I'm going to do is delete anything else that was on the graph before. Now it's empty, so I don't need to do that, but for fun I could just type it in. The detach means get rid of any relationships, and then delete means go delete the nodes that I've matched. So in this case, it's looking for nodes of type white paper. So what we're going to do now is we're going to then start populating Neo4j with data, and we're going to create a model that represents our PDFs or white papers in Neo4j, and that will allow us to start find commonality. So if you remember, in the original Bitcoin white paper that we had, the one, the 24th of March version, there was lots of metadata in there. So you remember CA1B, etc. Well, as the document ID, well, actually, I'm going to use that as the ID for this white paper. So I'm going to create a node called of white paper. It's going to have an ID, which is this document ID. I've given it a name, so I've just called it Bitcoin 24 March 09, and the reason I've called it that is so that I can represent it a little bit later, so I know which one I'm looking at. I've pulled the title from the paper, Bitcoin peer-to-peer there. I've pulled the author from the white paper, Satoshi Nakamoto, and I've pulled the email, so Satoshi GMX. Now, if you remember in the white paper, there was a language, which was this ENGB. But if I just type in ENGB, you can see language ENGB. So I've put that in there so that any other white papers that we start to add, we're going to look for that token as well. Remember the date, so I put sort of created date of 2009-03-24. Now, I would probably do another video on how you represent dates and timelines and all that sort of thing in Neo4j, but we're not going to do that in here. I've added a few other attributes to represent time zones. So I put the time zone offset as -6, and I put the time zone as mountain time zone. The original file name was bitcoin.pdf, so we've kept that. The document content creator, so I've set that to writer. So remember that we created something called writer. So remember that the document was created with OpenOffice Writer version 2.4. Well, that's what we've set as the creator there, and then it's all sort of put in there. And then for the encoding software, it's OpenOffice. So that's the tool that's encoded that, taken that from its original format to PDF, and then the version was 2.4. And then the PDF version was 1.4. I've captured the resolution here, which is US letter 612 by 792, the number of pages, the checksum in there, and then I've also captured that creator and producer sort of title. So there's a start of a digital footprint for that document. Now, if I wanted to, I could also go in and get all the fonts and then create that, but for just now, I think this is a sort of pretty good representation. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to copy that, and then what I'm going to do is go back into Neo4j. Let's just minimize this for a second. So I'm going to go back into Neo4j. I'm going to paste this in here. So we'll just hit the play button. And as you see, it's created one node, one label, and it's got 20 properties. So we'll just close that. And then if I run my match n, return n again, and we just switch this into graph mode, you can see we've got a node here. We haven't got any other nodes or relationships, etc. going on at the moment. But if I was to sort of stretch that out, then you can see all the data that I had in there is sort of captured. So that's pretty cool. So the next thing that I want to do now is start to create some of those other nodes so that I can start to create those links. So let's go back into Visual Studio Code for a second. I'm going to skip past these other white papers. We'll talk about them in a second. But I thought it might be useful for us to then create some authors. So in this case, we wanted the author Satoshi Nakamoto, so we'll create that, and then we want to create relationships where authors match. So let's go back into Neo4j. I'm just gonna create a new author, which is Satoshi. We'll hit run, and then we'll close that, and then if we run that again, we've now got my Bitcoin white paper and Satoshi Nakamoto. Now what I want to do is create a relationship between the two like I did on the iPad. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to run a little bit of code here, which is basically saying find me author nodes and white paper nodes. So I've got Satoshi and I've got Bitcoin, and where the author attribute, so the author property of the Satoshi Nakamoto node, which in this case is Satoshi Nakamoto, matches the author node of the Bitcoin white paper. So you can see it's Satoshi Nakamoto. Then create a relationship between the author and the white paper. So it's going to go from author to white paper. And then it's going to basically say this author authored this white paper. So that's the relationship. I guess I could do it the other way around. I could do a kind of a white paper to author, and then I could then call it author. That would be equally happy. So it depends on how you want to do that. In fact, let's do that. Let's have it from white paper to author, and then say this person was the author. So if I run that for a second, and then if we just kill that for a second and then run my match end to return end, you can now see that for this Bitcoin paper, there's an author relationship back to Satoshi Nakamoto. So, again, I could run that relationship either way, doesn't really matter. But that is where we are at the moment. So we've got some relationships, and actually that's quite a useful cipher statement, because I can use that as I start adding new white papers and new authors, etc. Then that will match any node to their associated author. Yep. And I can do the same here. So for emails, so let's take the satoshingmx.com. That was the email for associated with that paper. So if I just run that, we will create ourselves a new email node. And then what I'm going to do here is match the relationships for this. So I'm going to say, in this case, create a relationship between the white paper and the email node and call it email relationship. So if I just run that for a second, and then if I match this again, I'm now starting to build up this graph here. So this white paper here has the author is associated to the email address satoshigmx.com, and then this is associated with the author Satoshi Nakamoto. So what I want to do in this particular case is I want to be able to match encoding software as well. So what I want to do is capture the creator tool, the encoding software, so all of that stuff that we looked at, and then build the relationships so that we can see how these documents are related. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a node to represent OpenOffice. So we'll put that in here. We'll just call create. And then, in fact, you probably missed that. Let me just, I won't run it again, but you can see what I'm creating is the encoding software set to OpenOffice or 2.4. I'm setting the product as OpenOffice, and I'm setting the version. So that has now created that node. And then what I want to do, I'm going to skip this XMPP stuff. We'll come on to that a little bit later. And then what I also want to do is create a creator tool. In this case, it's going to be Writer. So in this case, it was OpenOffice Writer that created the document from. So that's in as well. And now what I want to do is create some relationships. So I'll do one for the encoding software, and then I'll do one for the creator. So let's run that for a second. So the encoding software node, I want to relate to the white paper where the product and version match. So if you remember in the properties, we had the software version, the software family, and we had the software version, so OpenOffice 2.4, where they match. Then we're going to create a relationship between the white paper and the PDF, the encoding software, and it's going to be encoding software as a relationship. So that's created, and then we're going to do the same for the creator tool. So what we will do is match the creator tool to the white paper, and then we will match the creator name, content creator, and we'll have this creator tool relationship. So we'll just run that for a second. So I've made quite a few changes here. So if I just run this, and now we're starting to build some interesting stuff, right? So what we've got here is I've got the email Satoshi at gmx.com, the author is Satoshi Nakamoto, the writer is, OpenOffice Writer is the creation tool, and OpenOffice is the encoding software. So I'm starting to build this digital footprint of this paper, right? And then it's going to allow me to, as I introduce other white papers, to see if the same tool was being used to create that software, if it came from the same source. It's pretty cool stuff, right? I could add things like the resolution in there. Remember, it was the US letter format. I could add that in there. I could add in the fonts. I'm not going to do that. Probably the last one I'll add in is the time zone. So let's create time zone for a second. If you remember, this was mountain time zone. So let's put that in. So I'll create a time zone called mountain. And then as you see there, the mountain is going to sit on its own because it's not related to anything. But now if I add in this match time zone to mountain, run that, it's going to then associate that mountain time zone back to this Bitcoin paper. So now I've got this sort of Bitcoin paper that was published, and the digital footprint of that paper starts to become exposed, right? So the creation tool, the author, the email, the time zone, and the encoding software. Okay, so now that we've got that represented, what might be a fun thing to do for us is to take that crisp document that I created earlier, if you remember, as a PDF, and now let's represent that in Neo4j as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this crisp PDF. I'm just going to copy it into this folder called control versions for a second. And what we will do is let's copy and paste this white paper node. We'll do that for a second. And what we're going to do is start filling in that information like we did before, like I did when I went through the original white papers. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up this crisp PDF. By the way, just so you know, if you were doing this, rather than having to manually type all this, what you could do is create a tool to go and extract all of that data. I haven't done that in this case because I kind of want to walk through the kind of process, but that's something you'd be able to do. So it could be an automatic process as opposed to sort of manually typing these things. So let's kind of come back. So there's a few things we want to do. So the PDF version in this case is 1.3 for this this new document. The name of this document, I'm just going to call it Chris. The title, I don't think I put a title in there, but let's just call it. So let's just call it Chris for just now. Actually, I didn't put it in there, so let's remove it. Let's have a look at the. Let's have a look at the crisp PDF and see what information else that we had in there. So you see there was a title called Chris. So let's keep the title Chris back there. I didn't have an author in this case, but we know it's me, so I'm going to just set that to Chris Hay. And then I'm going to use an email address. So I'm just going to say I know it's associated with my email address. So I'm going to use this chrisheyuk@notme.com. By the way, that is not my email address. So, let's kind of just be aware of that for a second. So please don't email that. But let's put that in here for just now. So email is chrisheyuk@notme.com. I don't think there was a language in here, which is interesting because obviously I'm in the UK, but no, there's no language that's being captured by Pages. So language can go. We can have a look at the created date. So let's find created. What's that word? Date. Let's find the date. So creation date in this case was 28. Yeah, so that sort of date there, UTC. So I'm just going to pull this for a second. I'm not interested in seconds. And I'm going to pull that into creation date here. So I'm going to put -00, and then I'm just going to. So I want 11:33:15 seconds. Actually, I want the full thing. So let me just pull all the way up to the Z, and let's put that in here, -00. That means I'm going to set 2021. I'm going to set that to 12, and I'm going to set that to 12. That's kind of cool. There was a 0 offset in this case. That sets my time zone to UTC, and the document file name is going to be chris.pdf. Now the document content creator in this case was Pages, so let's put the word Pages in there. And then if we remember, there was quite a big title associated with this, so let's just do a get info on that. Chris PDF. So the encoding software was wait a minute, actually the encoding software was this. So let's put encoding software as this. And then macOS versions 11.5.2. I could go and separate all of this out, but I'm not going to. So I'm gonna drop the. In fact, let's just put 11.5.2. It's probably not strictly 2, but let's stick with that as 11.5.2 is the version. The resolution is slightly different. It's 595.841. Kind of makes sense. I'm in the UK. Pages is 1, and then we will use the checksum. Let's go back into Chris here. Was there a checksum? No checksum in this particular case. Really interesting. So again, different PDF formats have different data, so we'll just get rid of this. I've got creation date. Was there a creator? No, there was no sort of creator or producer type tab, so we can get rid of this as well. So I'm going to get rid of all of this. So that is going to give me this white paper object. And then what we are going to do is we will take this, and we are now going to run that at my Neo4j. So if we were to run that for a second, you can see it's created that node. And then if I hit play, you can see I haven't created any of my relationships for that document. So we'll do that in a second, actually. So what we will do is I've commented a whole bunch of this stuff out here for a second. But before I run that, the thing I need to do now is just add that encoding software that I just created for my Mac. So let's just add that in here. So in this particular case, I think the encoding software was this macOS version, blah, blah, blah. So we'll just copy all of that, and we will put that in here. Let's put this in product. We might as well repeat it. Version we said was 11.5.2. And then we'll just give that the same name for just now. So macOS version blah, blah, blah. And then I also need to have the content creator tool. So in this case, it was Pages. So we'll just add this in as well. So we'll add Pages. And then what that's going to allow me to do, and I've already got UTC set up. So what that's going to allow me to do is just run all of this as a whole. So I'm just going to do a Control A, Control C, and then I'm going to delete everything, and then I'm going to recreate my graph with this extra white paper. And so we'll just run that for a second. You'll see it's going to take a few seconds to run all of this. Yep, it's created everything. So we can just get rid of this. And then if I run that again, what you're going to see is I've got my two new graphs. Now, if I just close this for a second, there's a few things I want you to notice here, right? There is no connections between this Bitcoin paper and this one, right? And this is the power of Neo4j. I've got my Chris document, which is in UTC. It was written in Pages. It was on macOS version 11.5.2. It was my Chris Hay email address, and Chris Hay is an author. There is no relationships whatsoever. They are unconnected graphs, and I think that is really powerful. So when we want to understand the connections between different tools, we can start to say, well, you know, does this have a similar digital footprint? So we know that the document that I've created here is not the same tool, not created in the same area. There's very little between those documents, so they don't have the same digital footprint. So, and I can sort of prove this even further. So what we can now do is I'm going to take basically is what I consider as another control document. So I'm going to take a paper that was created back in whenever. It's a paper called Hashcash. It's one of the papers that was originally a precursor to the Bitcoin Whitepaper. It's actually referenced in the Bitcoin Whitepaper. It's called Hashcash, which was created by Adam Back. So you can kind of see Adam Back, email Adam at Cypherspace, 1st of August 2002. So it was created a few years before the Bitcoin paper. Fascinating paper. You should absolutely check that out. But again, because it's a PDF, there's certain things I can do to this paper, right? So I can open up the PDF, and then I can go have a look at things that are to do with this document. So you can see it's PDF version 1.2. We can look underneath there, see if there's any other relevant information. So let's do a little bit of a scroll. Let's look for creator. So you can see there's a creation date. It was 2002, 1st of August. No time zone information, so I can't really determine that. But it is created with GNU Ghostscript 5.5. And in fact, if I reveal in Finder and we look at Hashcash here, do a get info. There's the Ghostscript 5.5. The resolution is the same, 612.792, version 1.2, pages 10. Okay, so that's kind of cool. And what I can do here is if I go back to my papers for a second, what I can do is another kind of control perspective that if I uncomment this for a second, so we'll just toggle that, I've represented that white paper in the same format. So Hashcash PDF is by author Adam Back. That's Adam's email address. Here's the creation date. Here's the document file name, PDF versions, resolution, pages, creation dates as well. So now that I've got that white paper node, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure Adam Back is an author node, and I'm going to make sure that his email address is here as well. I've already dealt with time zones. I've already got the encoding software there, GNU Ghostscript. I don't need to do anything with the creator tool because that's kind of not listed in that sense. So if I just take all of that, and then we will just Control C, we'll come back into Neo4j. We will run this. It'll take a few seconds. Okay, so it's now recreated my graph. And then if I run this, cool. Now I've got a Hashcash paper. I've got my Bitcoin paper of 24th of March. And I've also got, let's see here, I've also got this crisp paper that I created earlier. So this is starting to get kind of cool, but you see there's no links between any of these, right? So there is something that we've learned straight away. I mean, this paper was created in 2002, but we know for a fact, right, that the Bitcoin paper 24th of March was not created with the same tool set that was used to create the hashcash paper, right? The authors are not the same, the email addresses is not the same, and the encoding software is not the same. Now, if I captured nodes, if you remember the Bitcoin white paper, if I wanted to, there is a list of references of that paper. If I wanted to list how documents connected together to form, so rather than looking at how documents were created, if I wanted to see how things connected together, I could create a document reference type relationship, and then I would be able to relate these papers together with references. I'm not doing that in this paper, but because we're looking at kind of digital forensics. But what I'm trying to say here is, looking at this, we know that it's not created by the same tools. Yeah, so the same, whatever we use to create hashcash is not the same tools that was used to create this Bitcoin white paper. In the same way as this Chris document, these are forensically different. Okay, so we're in a good position. So let's add a few more documents. So the next document I want to add in is, as I said before, there was multiple versions of the Bitcoin paper. And in fact, there was one that was created on the 31st of October. That was the first sort of real publication, but there was a draft paper that was on the 3rd of October. Now, I don't have the 31st of October paper. I would love a copy. If you want to send it to me, that would be great. But I've got the paper that was created on the 3rd of October. So if I click on get info for this a second, there's a few things that are interesting. You can see OpenOffice org 2.4, content creator writer, resolution 612 by 792, 8 pages, version 1.4. If I were to open up that paper for a second, so we'll just open that up. And if we scroll to the top, you can see that the name of the paper is Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. That's the title, again, by Satoshi Nakamoto. But actually, the email address is different. It's satoshi@vistomail.com rather than the GMX one. And there's the abstract. And again, I haven't analyzed all the fonts and I haven't looked at the difference of the text, but you know, that is the information that we're sort of capturing in this case. Key thing is it's a different email address here. Now, if I were to open that code up in Visual Studio Code, then if we just open that here, we look at the encoding. Again, same sort of thing as before. There's a creator, there's a producer, there's a creation date, 2008, so there's the 3rd of October. It was 1349. But look here, right? This is really interesting. The time zone is -07, which is, in this particular case, because of when daylight saving times happens, this would indicate that this is in Pacific time zone because it would be 7 hours behind UK at that point in time. So in this case, it's in the Pacific time zone. We can talk about what that means in a second. The other interesting thing is if I go EN here, you've still got this ENGB tag as well. So, and again, it's got document checksum, all that sort of thing. So I've taken all of that information, and what I have done is I have created a node that already represents that. So we'll just toggle this off for a second, and you can see I've putting the ID in from before. I've called this Bitcoin 3rd of October 08. I put the different email address in. I've kept the language. I put the new creation date. I put this Pacific time zone. The file name is the same, bitcoin.pdf. The checksum is different. The encoding software I put in, PDF14, and then I put in the creation date, document creator, and the producer. So if we save that, I'm just going to update the emails here, so the VistaMail one is done. Again, if you want to ingest mass amount of documents, what you could do is just have a tool that automatically extracts this rather than manually writing it like I'm doing. So if I save this, and then we copy all of this, and then we open back up Neo4j, and then we run here. Take a few seconds, but it's going to recreate my graph database completely. We will close this down here, and then we'll just run our queries. Now we start to see interesting things. So let's come out for a second here. Things I want you to see is my crisp paper and the hashcash paper are completely disconnected. But if we were to sort of just zoom in a little bit here, what you're going to see is we're now seeing the joins between these two papers. There are differences here. And actually some of those differences is because of my idiocy, and we'll discuss that in a second. But you can see it's got a different email address between these two papers, but the key thing is they're using the same encoding software. For whatever reason, my creator tool, there should be a link between here and there, so we'll fix that in a second in the code. But what you would see is these papers would be linked by using the same encoding software and the same tool. But importantly, different email addresses and different time zones. And again, I don't know about fonts, I haven't analyzed this, but what this tells us is, and again, I could put links in for PDF versions, but what this would tell us is that these two papers are using the same software to create. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're obviously going to fix that relationship difference there, and we'll just sort that out in a second. And then what we're going to do is have a look at the new Bitcoin paper that was published by Craig Wright so that we can determine if it comes from the same tools. But before we look at that paper, what I want to do is actually load in a couple of Craig Wright's other papers that he created and use them as a kind of a control so that we can sort of understand the tools that he's used, and then that will help us determine if it's coming from the same source. So let's do that. So let's come back into Visual Studio Code for a second. As I said, I messed up that the document creator tool for a second, so I should have had writer in there, so but for whatever reason I missed that. So let's take document content creator, and we will add that in here as well so that the next time we run that version, it works. Alrighty, so before we go and look at the new version of the Bitcoin white paper that Craig has posted, let's have a look at one of the other papers that he's created, and we can use that as a kind of control point. So I'm going to open this up. It's a paper called Belief in Credences as Credence merely a belief in the level of belief. If I look at the PDF for that, you can see there's a kind of get info. Couple of things I want you to see is the content creator in this case was Adobe Acrobat PDF Maker 20 for Word, so we know he's created this in Word. The resolution is 595841, and then the encoding software is Adobe PDF Library 20 there. And again, we can look at this document at the binary like we did everything else, but you can kind of see there's a time zone. So it's created on the 8th of January. You can see the Z there, so you can see like my machine, it was created in UTC, so you can see it was created in somebody in a GMT time zone. You can see the PDF a PDF maker there. You can see PDF library, mod dates, etc. So, and then if we look under that there, you can kind of see this XMPP, you can see XMP Core 5.6. So you can tell it's a kind of fairly modern version that's sort of being created there. So that's cool. What I have done, and then you can see the creator there is Craig S. Wright. So the language is default. There's nothing saying it's UK or whatever, but that's fine. So what I have done in this sense is I have taken all of that information and then I've created that in my I've put it in the same format as we put everything else in there. So all those papers, content creators, PDF, etc. I've put into here. I've also captured this XMP core. It wasn't in any of the other PDFs, but we've added that in there as well. So that's pretty cool stuff. And then we will add Craig Wright to the authors table, and I think that puts us in a good space. We'll now add in that XMPP stuff that we had earlier, just so that we can create relationships there. So we've got Adobe PDF library in there as well. We'll just do this, and then we'll add in these XMP cores, and that's sort of fine. We'll put in some code to match those relationships. That's great, and we'll add in the new creator tool, and I think that sort of puts us in a pretty good place. So if I save this, I do Control C, and then if I were to go back into Neo4j for a second, and then we will just recreate my graph database once more. It'll take a few seconds. My graph database is created. Cool. And then if I hit return here for a second, we'll zoom out for a second and see how that paper is represented. But the key things that I want you to see is that there isn't really any relationships. These two Bitcoin papers are obviously related, but there's no relationship between this control paper and the paper that was used to create the Bitcoin papers. And I wouldn't expect there to be, right? They're 10 years apart. I wouldn't really imagine Craig to be using the same tools that he used to create Bitcoin back then. But what you can see is obviously there is a relationship between myself and Craig there via the time zone. We're on the same time zone, but we're not using the same tools. I've used Pages, I'm on macOS version 11, so we're not. You can see digital footprint wise, that paper is not created on the same machine as I created this paper, and you see hashcash is completely unrelated as well. Okay, that puts us in a sort of good position. And again, this is a great use for Neo4j. Although I'm using the Bitcoin paper, you can do this for any PDF. You can use this to do that sort of digital forensics anywhere. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at the paper that Craig created for the Bitcoin. So if you don't know, on Craig's blog, he created a new version of the Bitcoin paper. You can see the author is Satoshi Nakamoto, but Craig's written there, also known as Craig Stephen Wright. So he's came out as Satoshi Nakamoto. He's put his own website in there, and it's the reason it used to be the bitcoin.org, but obviously because Craig has claimed his copyright on that paper, then he's told them to bring down the original paper from bitcoin.org, and there's a whole sort of UK lawsuit on that. Very fascinating stuff, about sort of infringing his copyright. I mean, that's fine. And therefore, when he wants people to download the Bitcoin paper, he's asserted his copyright and said, if you want to download that Bitcoin paper, then you have to pull his version from his craigwright.net website. That's fine. As a copyright holder, he's very entitled to do that. But the key thing is, this is the exciting part, is we've got a new version of the Bitcoin paper. Isn't that exciting? Well, let's have a look at what that looks like underneath that. So that's the paper. Let's have a look. So I am gonna do a get info there, and it's super exciting. And then we can look at that. You can see it's 6.12.792. The encoding software is OpenOffice Org 2.4, the content creator's writer. So you know what? This is kind of looking like it's coming from the original document, OpenOffice 2.4. So I'm super excited by that. So let's open up this paper in Visual Studio.code. So click on this, and let's take a look. And so it's PDF version 1.6. Okay. There's that language tag ENGB. Cool. So it's sort of exciting there. And then there's this whole lot of Adobe stuff here. So here's this Adobe XMP Core 5.6, blah blah blah. You can see the content's slightly different from before. You can kind of see the create date, the creator tool. So you see creator tool as writer, but it's in this XMP format as opposed to the original document where it was creator tool. So it's kind of as if there's a newer tool being used, but it certainly looks as if it's been created sort of from the original document. So it's interesting in that sense. There's the author, so you can see Craig Wright is in the author there. He's got a copyright associated. Again, that's something we could do if we wanted to. We could capture these tags and then start to match them. I haven't done that. And then there's a document ID and then there's an instance ID. So it's super exciting. What I have done, I have taken all of that information that we had before and I put it into the same format. So what I've done is I've put that new ID that you saw in there. I've called it Bitcoin-CSW. The author is still Satoshi Nakamoto. The email's unknown because he didn't leave his email address on there. I don't know what his email address is. The title's the same. I've kept the created date on there because the document creation date, if we look at the paper, is still listed there. So you can see where was that? XMPP create date. Again, if I was wanting to be strict about forensics, then I would probably have two different tags in the document, one to cover XMP create date and one to cover the original, and then that would be better for forensics to match that up. But I'm being a bit lazy, to be honest. So anyway, I've kept the same create date because it's clearly a different tool. The creator tool was Writer, so okay, this is looking good. It's got a different modification date, so what I want to do now is capture modified date. I could capture metadata as well, but I want to capture that as well. So I've put all of that in there. I put these modification dates in there. So the same time zone exists because that's in the document, but obviously it's been, in this case, the modification date. See the Z there? No time zone afterwards, so therefore we know it's in UTC, and this is a -06. Okay, that's fine. But I've also captured some of the other kind of tools in there. So I've captured the XMP versions, etc. as well. Okay, so I've taken all of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to copy it. So we come back into Neo4j for a second. And then if we run this, it's going to take a few seconds. It'll run all of that. And now my Neo4j is created. And then if we just run match, and then now we've got a bunch of new relationships. So how exciting is this, right? So the hashcash paper is not related from a digital forensics point of view. My crisp paper over here isn't really that related, so I'm going to stretch that out over here. What I can see, I mean, we're obviously still in the same time zone, so that's fine. That SSRN one there is still there. But the exciting thing here, and by the way, I haven't linked that's a creator time zone. I could do a modified time zone, but I'm not too fussed about that just now. But the key thing here is, look, these papers are related. They've got the same creator tools. They've got, again, if I was being strict, I would do the different tabs, so which I really should have done, but I've not. But you can kind of see that it's coming from the same open office piece. You've got the mountain zones, etc. So I think that's kind of interesting. But the key thing is this new paper's got this link to the XMPP versions. So I want you to see here is the Bitcoin paper that was created by Craig is linked by the same XMPP version as the SSRN here. There we go. So that other document that Craig created, they're using the same XMPP version. So it's not to say it's completely the same, but that is a strong linking point, right? So if we look at that fingerprinting and that digital forensics on how to link two documents together, then something running the same XMP version, there's loads of people who will be running the same version of Adobe on their machine, but from a fingerprinting perspective, it's a clue, right? They could be coming from the same machine. But there is a difference, right? This document here is using the Acrobat PDF library, and for Word, and this one isn't. So for whatever reason, he's not used Word, but he has used kind of Acrobat. So that's interesting. It's really interesting. So there is a link between these two papers, but he hasn't used Office. He's used another tool, right, to with the XMP version, but it's not Office he's used to create that. So that's really interesting. I would have, has he used the original OpenOffice 2.4 version, but he's not used Word like he did in that document. So, okay. I wonder if I can do something similar myself. So what I'm going to do, just for a bit of fun, I'm going to take the 29th of March version of that Bitcoin paper. I'm going to take a copy of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it Bitcoin Chuck 2, because I did this on my machine yesterday, and I've got it all sort of preset. But I'm going to show you what I did. So I'm going to do Bitcoin Chuck 2. And then we will relate this. So what I'm going to do so that is a copy at the moment. There's nothing different. This is the Satoshi Nakamoto GMX version. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up with Adobe Acrobat. So there you go. So Adobe Acrobat I get as part of my Adobe subscription. So all these videos are, I use Premiere Pro to do the editing, and as part of Adobe Creative Suite, I get Adobe Acrobat with that. Okay, so let's say for a second I decided I wanted to edit this document. Maybe I wanted to put my own name in there for whatever reason. So I could just edit the text in Adobe Acrobat and I can modify it. So I could just go Chris Hay, and then I could go Chris Hay UK at notme.com, and then I could change that to whatever, youtube.com Chris Hay UK, right? I could. There's nothing stopping me. I can just save it. And that's what Adobe Acrobat allows me to do. I can just hit close, and then I will just save it. There we go. I have now edited the document. So if I've edited that document, what does it look like? Well, let's do what we did before. Let's do a get info. And you can see it's got last open, it's version 1.4, it's pages 9, the resolution 612. Content creator still writer, and the encoding software is OpenOffice org 2.4. So none of that's changed. Now, how does that look if I open this in Visual Studio Code? So if we come down further in the document, what you can see is I've got all of this XMPP stuff back again, right? I've got Adobe XMP Core version 79.2. You can see 2021 1400, which is when I sort of created that. You can see it's kept the create date, it's kept the creator tool, but it's got a new modify date, 2021 1623. And you can see the Z because I'm in UTC time zone. I'm in UTC time zone there. The producer's still OpenOffice, and I've got a new document ID and an instance ID. So that kind of looks identical, right? So, I mean, let's kind of open it up in Neo4j for a second, rather than using the one that we just did there. For easiness sake, I'm going to use the one that I created last night, just for a second, so that you don't have to watch me sort of toggle through that. But there's the kind of so I've called this Bitcoin Chuck. There's the Chris Hay UK at notme.com. There is the title. There's all the various day. But of course, I've kept all of the XMPP stuff there. Again, I could put the modified time zone in there if I wanted. I haven't in this particular case. But let's do this. Control A. Let's come back into Brave for a second there, and it's going to recreate my Neo4j. And then if I just run this again, what you're going to now see, and it's getting a little bit messy here, so we can take hashcash, which is not related in any way. We can take my Chris. I'll put it over here. We can take this here, but the key things that we want to see here is I've got, let's just scroll this in for a second. I've got two documents created by Chris Hay, which is the Bitcoin Chuck that I just created a second ago, and the Chris document that we created at the beginning of this, right? This one was created using the Pages tool, and this one was created and using on Mac, and then this one was obviously, as you can see with the XMPP links, was created by Adobe XMP, and I happen to use version 7 in this case. I don't know why it's creating 2 links per one. And then in this case, if you look here, both are linking to Adobe XMPP as a version, and then we've got version 5 here is being used to create for the Bitcoin CSW version, the Craig Wright version. And then, as you can see, Craig has created another document where he's used Adobe PDF Library and Adobe, he's obviously used Word to create that there. And that links to the same XMPP version. So you can kind of really see that the same machine is being used probably to create that Bitcoin paper and that other paper that he created, SSRN. But it's very clear that one tool was used, which was Adobe Acrobat to create the Bitcoin paper, and obviously Microsoft Word was used, or some version of Word was used to create the other SSRN paper, and it saved as PDF. In the same way as I used Pages to create one document, and then I used Acrobat. But I think it's fairly identical. The way that I created that version of the Bitcoin paper, the Bitcoin Chuck version, is pretty much, as you can kind of see from the tags, they're identical. And that is the power of Neo4j. So the thing that we can tell from doing this analysis is, and using Neo4j, is that sadly, from my perspective, that Bitcoin paper wasn't created from the original OpenOffice 2.4. It's an edited version of the PDF version of that paper. And actually you can clearly see that it's actually linked to the 29th of March version rather than the 3rd of October version, because if I pull away the 3rd of October version, there's no links. Whereas you can see this is all related to that 29th of March version because it's using the same time zones, document creation dates, etc. So that is the linking point, in the same way as this is linked to that 29th of March version as well. So we can, again, I could create some more nodes to link it further, more relationships to link it further, but I'm not going to do that. But you can see that the version I created, the version Craig created, all come from the 29th of March version and there it is. Sorry, the 24th of March version. It's a shame. I would have loved to have seen this paper being created from the original document rather than sort of created from the PDF version. But Neo4j allows us to do that from a digital forensics. As I said, I've manually done this. I've manually went in and extracted those properties. You could create a tool which would then automatically extract those properties and then automatically create those links in Neo4j. And you could do this with any PDF, you could do it with any document and create those links and then figure out which documents are created from the same tool set if you've got the right forensics. So absolutely fascinating. Anyway, I'm hoping this video, so there's the answer to the question that I posed at the beginning, which is no, it is not created from the original OpenOffice version. It is created from the PDF version, and it was clear that Adobe Acrobat was used to edit that document. So from a computer history side of things, that makes me sad, but you know what? That's kind of cool. Maybe the document was lost, whatever. But, it would have been cool to see that document republished from the original OpenOffice version. However, that's not the purpose of this talk. The purpose of this video, of course, is to show how you can use Neo4j to do that digital forensics. And as I said, you can do this with any document. You can do this at scale by having tools automatically pull out those attributes. You could do this not just with PDFs, you could do it with Word documents using these digital footprints, and then you can do this kind of analysis on your own side of things to try and figure out whether things came from the same machine, by the same creator, etc. Absolutely brilliant techniques. Love it. Anyway, I hope you've had a lot of fun, as much fun as I had creating this video, and I hope you've kind of learned how you can use Neo4j to do your own digital forensics. And I hope that was a kind of a bit of a fun example of how you can use the tool to do that. And anyway, speak to you soon in the next video.